There's a moment that comes after she leaves. Not immediately. Not in those first raw days when you're checking your phone every 10 minutes or replaying conversations trying to understand what went wrong. It comes later, weeks, maybe months after the breakup, when something shifts inside you. You're sitting alone on a Thursday night and you realize you haven't thought about her in hours, maybe days. And that realization doesn't hurt. It feels like relief, like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. But here's the part nobody tells you about making her regret losing you. It has nothing to do with her at all. Every man who's been left goes through the same pattern. The grief, the anger, the desperate mental negotiations about what you could have done differently. You replay the relationship like a detective examining evidence, convinced that if you can just understand what happened, you can fix it. You imagine scenarios where you show up at her door with the perfect words that make her realize her mistake. You fantasize about running into her somewhere and having her see the better version of yourself you've become. But all of that? That's you still living in her shadow. That's you still making her the center of your story. And as long as you're doing that, she'll never regret anything. You know what actually creates regret in someone who left you? Your absolute indifference to whether they feel it or not. Your complete immersion in a life that no longer includes them or the possibility of them. Not because you're trying to punish them or prove a point, but because you genuinely don't care anymore. And that genuine not caring? That's what haunts people. Because as long as you're angry or hurt or trying to win her back, she still has power over you. But when you're genuinely neutral, when she reaches out and you respond with polite distance, when you see her and feel nothing, she realizes she's lost something irretrievable. Most men waste months, sometimes years, trying to become the person she wanted instead of the person they needed to be. They hit the gym, thinking about how she'll see their transformation. They focus on their career, imagining the moment she realizes they were actually going somewhere. They date other women hoping she'll hear about it and feel jealous. But here's what actually happens when you do things to get a reaction from someone else. You stay tethered to them. Every achievement becomes hollow, because it's performed for an audience that may never even notice. Every step forward still has her in your peripheral vision. You're running, but you're still looking back, and that backward glance, that's what keeps you stuck. The men who actually make their ex-partners regret the breakup are the ones who disappear completely, not physically. You don't have to move to another city or delete social media or become a ghost. You disappear emotionally. You withdraw your attention, your energy, your emotional availability from the possibility of her. You stop checking if she's watching. You stop performing for an audience of one. You start building a life so compelling that her absence becomes irrelevant. Not because you're trying to make her jealous, because you've genuinely moved on to something better. There's a specific moment in the healing process that changes everything. It's not the first time you wake up without thinking about her. It's not the first date you go on with someone else. It's the moment you realize you wouldn't take her back even if she wanted to come back, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity, because the man you've become through this process of loss and rebuilding doesn't fit with the woman who left him. You've outgrown her. You've outgrown the version of yourself who needed her validation to feel complete. I had a client, 47 years old, divorced after his wife left him for someone she met at work. Michael spent the first 6 months trying to understand what went wrong. He analyzed every conversation, every argument, every moment where he might have failed her expectations. He became obsessed with becoming the man she claimed she wanted, more attentive, more emotionally available, more successful, but he was building that version of himself for her approval. And then something shifted. He stopped going to therapy to talk about her. He started going to talk about himself, his dreams, his interests, the life he wanted to build regardless of whether anyone witnessed it. About 9 months after the divorce was finalized, she reached out, not with a direct message, with a like on an old photo, then a comment on something he posted, then a text about just checking in. Michael responded politely but briefly. He wasn't cold, he wasn't warm, he was neutral, and that neutrality drove her crazy. Because neutrality meant he'd stopped caring, and people only truly value what they lost when they realize it can't be recovered. She asked to meet for coffee, to talk about closure. Michael agreed because he genuinely felt nothing about seeing her, no anxiety, no hope, no anger, just a mild curiosity about what she wanted to say. They met. She spent 2 hours essentially explaining that she'd made a mistake, that she'd been confused, that she wanted to try again. Michael listened, nodded occasionally. And at the end, he said something that made her regret permanent. He said, "I appreciate you being honest. But I've moved on, not moved on to someone else necessarily. Moved on from who I was when we were together. I'm not that person anymore, and I don't want to go back to being him. That response, that's what creates lasting regret. Not anger, not lists of reasons why she hurt you, just the calm acknowledgement that you've become someone different and that different person doesn't include her. But here's what most men miss. You can't fake that transformation. You can't pretend to be over someone while secretly hoping they'll notice how over them you are. That's still attachment. That's still need. Real transformation happens when you stop thinking about her reaction entirely, when you pursue your own interests because they interest you, not because they might impress her, when you build friendships because you value connection, not because you want her to hear you're doing well. The men who make their ex-partners truly regret leaving are the men who become unreachable, not because they blocked her number or refused to respond, because they've moved so far beyond that relationship emotionally that any attempt to reconnect feels like trying to have a conversation with someone who's already left the room. You're physically present, but mentally and emotionally somewhere she can't access. And that inaccessibility, that's what triggers the deepest regret. Because it confirms that she didn't just lose the relationship, she lost the opportunity to be with the man you've become. People think regret is about making someone see what they lost. But real regret isn't about them seeing. It's about them knowing they can never have it again. She can see you thriving. She can hear about your success. She can know you're dating someone wonderful. But as long as she believes she could get you back if she wanted to, none of that creates lasting regret. It's only when she realizes the door is permanently closed, not because you're angry but because you've genuinely moved on, that the regret becomes the kind that keeps her up at night. I've seen this pattern play out dozens of times. The men who focus on making their ex regret the breakup rarely succeed because their focus is still on her reaction. But the men who focus on building a life they're genuinely proud of, those men create regret without trying. Because they become living proof that life without her isn't just tolerable, it's better. They wake up in spaces arranged exactly how they want. They spend their time on pursuits they find meaningful without having to justify or explain those choices. They discover parts of themselves that were dormant during the relationship. And all of that transformation happens not because they're trying to prove something to her, but because they're finally free to become who they actually are. The silence in your apartment isn't lonely anymore, it's sacred. The ability to make decisions without consultation isn't selfish, it's freedom. The space everyone told you to fill reveals itself as exactly what you needed all along. You start understanding that all those years you thought you were building something with her, you were actually losing something within yourself. Piece by piece, compromise by compromise. You handed over parts of your identity believing that love required that level of sacrifice. But here's what you learn when you're finally on the other side of that pattern. Love shouldn't require you to become less yourself. So how do you make her deeply regret losing you? You don't. You release the need for her regret entirely. You stop measuring your progress by whether she's noticed. You stop checking if she's watching. You build a life so aligned with your authentic self that her presence or absence becomes irrelevant, not because you're damaged or bitter or afraid to love again, because you've finally learned what you're actually worth. And what you're worth is someone who chooses you without needing to be convinced, someone who values you without requiring you to perform. The months pass. You stop counting them. The notifications from her stop triggering anything in you. You see her name and feel the same mild neutrality you'd feel seeing any acquaintance from your past. She becomes a chapter you read once, understood and closed, not with anger, not with resentment, just with the quiet acknowledgement that it wasn't the story you thought it was going to be. And that's okay, because the story you're writing now, it's better, more honest, more aligned with who you actually are. And then one day, maybe months or years later, you're somewhere doing something you love. You're present, engaged, genuinely happy, hear through someone that she asked about you, and you feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even curiosity, just a gentle recognition that she was part of your past, but has no claim on your present or future. And that complete emotional neutrality? That's when you know you've moved on, not because you made her regret losing you, because you no longer care whether she does. That's the ultimate victory, not winning her back, not making her suffer, not proving anything to her or anyone else, just reclaiming yourself completely. Building a life that belongs entirely to you. And knowing that anyone who gets to be part of that life from this point forward will have to earn that place through genuine compatibility, through mutual respect, through the kind of love that makes both people more of who they are instead of less. She left. And in leaving, she gave you something she never could have given you by staying. She gave you yourself back, everything you sacrificed to make the relationship work. Every piece of your identity you handed over believing that's what love required. every dream you shelved to accommodate someone else's vision. All of it came flooding back when she walked away, and now you know something she may never understand. You know that the person you became without her is someone worth keeping, someone worth protecting. That's not about making her regret anything. That's about respecting yourself enough to never need her to. And that self-respect, that quiet certainty that you're exactly where you need to be, that's what she'll regret losing. Not the man she left, but the man you became after she was gone. The man she'll never have access to again, not because you're punishing her, because you finally learned you deserve better. You don't make her regret losing you. You become the kind of man who wouldn't take her back, and that transformation changes everything. If this resonates to you, hit the subscribe button. See you in the next video.